right, so welcome everybody. We'll get started. I'm joined here by Aki from 350 Seattle. And today we're going to talk about what climate justice and social work looks like. A lot of people really associate the clinical side of social work like as the whole field, but social work is clinical work, but it's also a lot of organizing. You can do social work in so many fields. So today we're here to talk about one of those intersections. Aki, would you like to introduce yourself, maybe name, pronouns? Talk a little bit about 350 Seattle and what you do there right now.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much, Shaila. Hi, everyone. I'm Aki. My name's Akiksha Chatterjee. I go by Aki. I use she, her pronouns. It's so great to be here with everybody. I'm just gonna say I get nervous. So if I'm ever speaking too fast, just feel free to interrupt me and be like, slow down, please. Yeah, so I am a campaigns director at the local climate justice nonprofit here in Seattle called 350 Seattle. And my role is really about designing and executing strategic grassroots people powered campaigns that both tackle the climate crisis and help us address systemic inequality and inequities and other forms of social injustice. So we really focus on intersectional solutions to the climate crisis at 350 Seattle. It's a core part of how we organize. And our mission is to, create systems change, resist fossil fuels, and build momentum for healthy alternatives. I went to UW, I think it was 2019. I graduated in 2021. The dates always get blurry for me because of the pandemic. But I graduated in 2021 and I focused on administration and policy practice.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aki. Yeah, so I'm curious if you could talk about how first, like how you found social work. I know like on 350 Seattle's website and people who know you talk about how you grew up in India and you've discussed how that has influenced your interest in climate justice. But I'm curious, yeah, what drew you to social work specifically and why did you choose the Master of Social Work program to be able to enter this field of climate justice work?
Yeah, right. So I grew up in Pune, India, which is in this western state of Maharashtra. And so I think I grew up really kind of witnessing the degradation of nature, unfortunately. Pune is a very polluted city, and my mom would always tell me stories about like when she was growing up, it was a breezy hill station with lots of trees, and she could like play in the streets. And that's just like so far from the reality now or when I was growing up. It's difficult to walk outside. It's gotten so bad. So that's one part of it. And then, of course, the impacts of climate change itself are really quite severely felt in India. Heat waves, droughts, water pollution, water shortages, terrible floods that particularly impact our agricultural sector, but like so many various impacts of the climate crisis. And then all of this for us is like compounded by crumbling infrastructure, power outages. For me, every Thursday the lights would go out. I remember that like all day. But really, it's the most marginalized amongst us that will suffer the harshest consequences. So anyway, I was carrying all of this with me at the time, but I don't think I really understood the root causes of the climate crisis or like the central role that our global economic system that's dominated by the US and Western hegemony and like built on extraction and exploitation, how all of this like the role this played in fueling the climate crisis. I hadn't connected those dots, but I just knew sort of like deep in my bones, maybe as so many young people do today, that this was a defining existential threat and I wanted to do something about it. But at the time that I was looking into social work, I didn't know what to do about the climate crisis. So I actually applied thinking I would go the clinical route for a number of personal reasons, mainly that, one of them being that I grew up, with an addict and thought that mental health is where I want to put my energy. Um, but once I got to grad school, I started learning. I started learning about these root causes of the climate crisis and how our economy is designed to extract and exploit, and like particularly from those in the global south. And I started to learn about how our capitalist system itself is fueling the climate crisis, and then how the climate crisis exacerbates other forms of inequalities. And so my analysis began to sharpen, and then with that came the anger and the desire to tackle this issue. And it was great because I now was at the School of Social Work and I knew that I could do the policy and administration track. And I began to understand like what I could do about this issue and how I could get involved. And I think at this point, I was also learning a lot about past social movements, and I was beginning to see that a lot of meaningful systemic change that we see that actually moves the needle and improves people's lives doesn't usually come from a top-down approach. It comes from strategic, powerful, disruptive grassroots movements. And so this was really sort of my, I think, awakening moment where I figured out how I fit into the climate justice movement and what I wanted to do. And so that's what happened. In my second year at the School of Social Work, I gave up a paid practicum in childcare to go intern with 350 Seattle, which is where I now work. And yeah, I'll just, close by saying that I was new to all of this, to community organizing, to policy and political analysis, and I didn't grow up like steeped in this kind of work. So I had a lot of learning to do and still have a lot of learning to do. But yeah, that's how I ended up here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that the work that you do, not only like just between climate justice and social work, but also like with that global and international perspective is so important and something that we don't always get either in social work education in general or just like in the K through 12 system. So I really appreciate you offering that perspective as well. And it's really easy right now, like politically and things too, to just think domestically, but it's like climate justice is such an existential threat to everybody across the globe and also impacts other communities and countries disproportionately. So I appreciate that. So in your journey, so after you graduated, and let me know if this is right or not, Aki, but after you graduated from school of social work, at some point you worked at Positive Money US, which is a not-for-profit research and campaign organization about restructuring and reimagining money and campaign funding. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because in your previous answer too, you talked about yeah, how capitalism has furthered this climate crisis as well and the opportunities for social work. Could you talk about your time at Positive Money US and then how that prepared you to work at 350 Seattle?
Yeah, so I think, the key part that you nailed on the head was like our economic system is built on extraction and exploitation. But I think like to relate it to social work, I feel like for us it's always been more than direct service, right? It's about understanding and changing the systems that impact people's lives. So financial systems and climate policy, they seem far from traditional practice, but I started learning about, how that they directly impact things like housing stability, health outcomes, economic inequality, food systems, and these are all issues that social workers deal with every day, right? And so then, also just the fact that climate change disproportionately impacts low income and communities of color, and so does our financial system. So it's fundamentally a social justice issue. And then, at Positive Money, I learned so much about, the way our financial system is built and how like money is created and where investment flows and how these can either reinforce inequality or help address it. And at the moment, our financial system is 100% not designed for the public good. It's designed to extract, exploit, and make wealthy people even wealthier. So at its heart, my work there was about trying to address a system that is fueling not only the climate crisis, but also all of these other crises, housing, healthcare, and other forms of inequity that are like baked in to our systems that social workers deal with every day. Um, and so I think social workers will play a critical role here because we bring a systems lens and an intersectional analysis. Like we're trained to see how these issues connect and to center the people most impacted. And without that, right, there's a real risk of like siloing our problems or missing the root causes there. And um, I think coming back to the to 350 Seattle, like I worked at Positive Money US because I wanted to like tackle these big systemic issues. But coming to 350 Seattle, it was more about community organizing and like centering community care and resilience in the work we do and kind of moving back to like the local impacts. So I think that's what moved me from Positive Money back to 350 Seattle is that I just wanted to come back to doing some more community, local, grassroots work here in Seattle.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, wanted to learn a little bit more about, yeah, your community rooted and your people power organizing that you do with 350. What are some of the skills that you learned from social work that you use in your everyday work at 350 Seattle, to further climate justice? And what are, yeah, some of the day-to-day, what does like a day in your life look at 350 Seattle as their campaigns director? And what are some projects that you're currently working on there?
Ooh, big question. Yeah, so I think social workers bring, I think, a lot of key strengths. I named one of them, we're trained to center lived experience. We're trained to center the voices of communities most affected by various forms of oppression and injustice, so that we can make our policy and our services and our responses more equitable. I said, we're also trained in systems thinking. We are trained to see and challenge structural injustice, which helps us connect individual outcomes, I think, to larger forces and really understand, as I've been saying, what the root causes of the issues are. And we have strong advocacy and coalition building skills. We're trained to understand, accept, and work across differences, which are, I think, really critical for pushing institutional and systemic change. Um, so yeah, I think we're pretty essential contributors to like helping translate complex policy to direct human impact and ensuring that equity and justice are at the heart of all of the advocacy that we do. In my work at 350, this has been pretty foundational because, as I said at the top of this call, it's a big part of our work, right, is to advocate for intersectional solutions. And we do this particularly under a Green New Deal framework, which is about addressing inequity, creating good jobs, and reducing emissions. And like all our organizational work is also rooted in community care and resilience, which again, I think are so foundational to social work and social work identities. So I think having social work training, having that background has been absolutely critical, for me in the work that I do and making sure that my advocacy and all of the campaigns we run are grounded in the real needs of communities that are most impacted. Um, yeah, I think I also want to add that, I don't think we see care work and collective care as that, social workers are so deeply embedded in that, but it's often overlooked as a part of social change movements and resistance work. But it is such a core part of it, especially when it's embedded in a larger vision and strategy, for social transformation. And then I think you asked what my day to day looks like. It's actually really different day to day. It depends on, the campaigns and the projects that we're working on. Right now, I am working on a Make Polluters Pay campaign, which is a statewide effort to hold the largest fossil fuel companies financially accountable for all the harm that their pollution has caused in our state, so that we can raise equitable and progressive revenue to fund the things that are actually going to help us become more resilient and adapt to the impacts of climate change. Um, so my day to day is, that working on that campaign, building out a coalition, of BIPOC and frontline led grassroots organizations, figuring out how we're going to organize, how we're going to introduce policy, shopping around for legislators. But what's interesting about this job, or what I really partly what I love about this job, is that my day to day never looks the same. There's always different things to do, different challenges to tackle. I'm also on the Green New Deal Oversight Board for the City of Seattle, so I do some work around that as well. We're just gearing up to submit our budget proposals for this year. So that's pretty exciting. And then, what was it? I think you asked another question.
I think that was it. Yeah, your day-to-day skills from social work that have been essential. Oh, and current projects you're working on, which you also did cover. But if there's anything else in those areas, feel free to add.
I'll just add that 350 as an organization works on many different things. Each staff person sort of has their own kind of body of work. So the Make Polluters Pay campaign is what I'm working on, but we also have like a statewide legislative advocacy arm. We have an anti-war team. We have, a climate grief and empowerment team. We have a book club. So we have our hands in a lot of different things, as a climate group.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like 350's approach is really holistic. And then 350 Seattle is a part of the larger 350 Washington. Is that right?
Yeah, so 350 Washington Network is held by our statewide civic action team, which like is they mobilize every legislative session, and we work with our statewide partners, our statewide 350s um, during that. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. This was not a part of our prepared question, so feel free to take a second to think, but I kind of wanted to follow up with what are some of I know Washington has been a really big leader in climate justice and climate action in the country. I think our state has one of the cleanest, or the area has some of the cleanest air, like compared to some other states. And we use a lot of clean, like renewable energy for electricity. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest challenges that have come up in your work? So even though Washington has been a leader in our country for clean energy and for climate justice, what are some of the biggest challenges or things that you're still fighting for? Like I know you were mentioning like globally, like holding polluters accountable, but are there like systemic issues or unique challenges in the state that you're coming up against or policy barriers? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, I can speak to this in the context of the work that I've done and I'm doing. The campaign that I'm working on would be a statewide law that we would pass. And I think, you know, one of the challenges that Washington faces, and that we're going to face, especially with the campaign that the Make Polluters Pay campaign, because it works by passing what's called climate superfund legislation, um, is that we have a climate policy, a statewide climate policy, which is our Cap and Invest program, called the Climate Commitment Act. I don't know, folks have probably heard about the Climate Commitment Act, which is like, you know, was a landmark like climate policy. And that was, you know, written with big oil at the table. And so it has a lot of giveaways for, you know, some of the most polluting industries. And I think that we are going to face challenges around proposing another revenue bill that targets fossil fuel companies, you know, having the history of the Climate Commitment Act and all of the stuff that happened around that. Like there was a whole effort before the Climate Commitment Act to pass a carbon tax of a form, and then the oil and gas industry. It was a huge statewide movement that came together to do that. And then the fossil fuel industry spent millions of dollars to squash that effort. And then we got the Climate Commitment Act as like this cool, we can't win without big oil at the table. Let's write this with big oil at the table. And so I think that's going to be a challenge for us as we're going up against a really powerful industry that like has a lot of access, has a lot of resources that grassroots BIPOC folks don't. And I think the other piece to that is that we're trying to do this by centering environmental justice and BIPOC and frontline communities. Traditionally, that doesn't happen in climate policy. Frontline communities are usually an afterthought. And this is the case even with the Climate Commitment Act. They promised all this money for environmental justice communities. And only a fraction of that is actually being given to environmental justice communities. So we always are running up against this, like, you know, they're an afterthought. These communities are an afterthought, and folks that are most likely to experience the worst consequences of pollution, as well as climate disasters, underinvestment, economic injustice, racial injustice. So I think that's going to be a challenge for us in our work trying to do this statewide campaign, given the context of how climate policy has traditionally looked in Washington and who's behind writing these policies and how these campaigns are built. We also have like powerful industries here. You know, we have the Chamber of Commerce, and they wield a lot of power as well. So there's a lot of like things to go up against that we need to fight for and organize around. I hope that helps answer your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Like even though Washington State has a lot of good work towards climate justice so far, like the Climate Commitment Act, these big polluters are national companies or sometimes international too. So I know that their impact and that work is going to be ongoing, and especially probably under this administration. We have about two more questions just for audience, just as for the audience as an FYI, and then we're going to open it up for questions. So just giving you a heads up, if you have questions or are mulling over something, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them really soon. And you'll also be able to just unmute and ask a question too. So just as a heads up. So I know you just talked, Aki, about some of the challenges. To end on a more positive note, what are some of the biggest wins you've had in your career so far, with either with 350 Seattle or just in general related to climate justice, and anything like that excites you about what's the work ahead, about what people are working on right now, and where you hope future students and future people in this room and beyond will lead us. So yeah, biggest wins, where you hope, what you're most excited for about in the future of climate justice leadership.
Cool. Biggest wins. I think for one of the wins that I want to highlight that we can't take full, like it's not a solely 350 Seattle effort, right? But something we threw down hard for was social housing. I don't know, for folks in Seattle, you may be well plugged into this, but we had a huge win last February where we passed a tax on the wealthiest corporations to fund social housing, which was also created by a voter mandate the year prior. So it was like back to back, the city of Seattle was voting to create permanently affordable, publicly owned mixed income housing. The reason why we wanted to highlight this is because we got involved in this campaign because of this, what I've been saying around climate change being an intersectional problem. Our unhoused neighbors are really the ones that, when heat waves strike or when there's a winter freeze, where are they going to go if they don't have access to clean air and cooling? So it felt really important that we tackle the housing crisis from that angle, but also because emissions from housing are really, really high. And urban sprawl is another huge, huge contributor to climate change. So when we're building like denser communities where people can work where they live, walkable communities, bikeable communities, these are all long-term solutions that help bring down emissions, but also tackle a deep-rooted inequity in our society and create resilient communities for the long haul, right? So that was really, I think I wanted to highlight that because it felt so good to win, but then also do it by taxing wealthy corporations so we can fund social housing, the same corporations that are like driving up the housing prices in Seattle and like creating an unlivable city unless you earn six figures. So that felt so powerful. And it was a whopping win. The Chamber of Commerce came out against it. Amazon came out against it. Microsoft came out against it. They like poured so much money in the like tail end of the campaign to kill the what it was called Prop 1A, previously known as I-137. It became Prop 1A because at the time Bruce Harrell was in the pocket of the chamber and introduced an alternative that was totally not about social housing, and they lost. It was so incredible. I think people really saw one, the vision for a better city, a more equitable city, and then two, why it's important that the people who can actually afford to pay to fund it. So, yeah, that's one win I want to highlight. And I think that like maybe feeds into I think your question was about what I'm excited about. It's just thinking about how we can move to a clean energy economy in a way that creates good jobs, strengthens communities, and doesn't leave people behind. And I think that's like especially where social workers can contribute, especially in terms of like community engagement, ensuring that the solutions we advocate for reflect lived experience and benefit the communities that are most impacted and improve lives on a day-to-day basis. Um, yeah, and I think another piece that feels important to highlight here that we talk a lot about in organizing is how do we build the power that we need, right, to create these big changes. So again, I think social workers, if we can connect the daily emergencies and overlapping crises to how climate action can create better jobs, address inequality, lower stress level, lead to better quality of life, then I think we can build a broader constituency that's really invested in climate action and getting meaningful climate policies passed. So yeah, that's what's exciting to me. Chala, were you asking also about what folks can do or think about as
Yeah,
social
yeah. And that kind of relates to the final question too about any final thoughts. And then how can people or students here too, prospective students, current students, future social workers get involved in climate justice action today? What are some opportunities and maybe and like you mentioned, climate justice is so intersectional with housing, with financial structures, with so many parts of everyday life. So it sounds like there's a lot of opportunities, but yeah, how can people get involved either at the micro level, at the community level, at the policy level? Yeah, let us know.
Yeah. Okay. So I think generally speaking, you can start with where you're at now, right? Look at how climate impacts might be showing up in your community, in the work that you do. You can think about where there might be overlap with the work that you're doing. If it's in housing justice, you might be working with people, like I said, that are like unable to access cooling when we have heat waves. And so yeah, just looking at where you're at and finding how what you're doing might have an overlap with an aspect of the climate crisis could be a place to start. You could think about, are there community members that you work with, marginalized ones especially, that aren't represented in local climate action planning? You could think about what investments might be needed in things like public transit, housing, um, the kinds of solutions that provide those intersectional benefits, job access, healthcare, and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and then connect with others locally that are trying to address the issues that stand out to you that overlap with your area of social work and your expertise. You could also find a policy issue that might intersect, like funding is a good one that you could think about, and then get involved, raise awareness about it, go testify at a hearing, join a local group, take other action that draws on your expertise and your networks. And you could be the one that brings a climate justice lens to your organization or place of work, right? You could be the one that helps build that analysis and then helps integrate it into how you design your programs and services and how you respond. So many ways to think about it, but definitely emphasizing like start with where you're at, where you work, your local impacts, and how they might overlap with the work that you're doing. And in terms of getting involved, I'm gonna say 350 Seattle. Come get involved with us. We have lots of stuff going on. Earth Day is coming up next week. We're gearing up for a May Day mobilization. I'll drop a link in the chat. It's a really great time to get involved with us. We are a very welcoming community. We have a lot of like different entry points. So it's not just where we really emphasize building community and taking action together for the long haul. So, we have things like a monthly potluck. We have art builds. We have, like I said, a book club. So check us out. Come get involved. And then, yeah, I would say if you're in Seattle, there are lots of organizations. I worked with House Our Neighbors, for example, in the social housing campaign. They are an excellent organization to get involved with. If you're looking more for climate work, there's Puget Sound Sage as well. They do a lot of local work. For statewide work, Front and Centered is a really good organization to check out. They do excellent policy work and have a really deep environmental and racial justice lens. They're the ones that passed the HEAL Act, which is another foundational policy for our state that really was the first kind of policy that coordinates a statewide approach to environmental justice that you can check out. So Front and Centered is a good organization. Anyway, I don't want to just like list off all of the organizations. There's lots of ways to get involved. You can start by thinking about what overlaps with the work that you're doing and the climate crisis, and then go from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Aki. Yeah, no, this was so, even though I had an idea, I know I'm a student in the master policy program right now and have students that work with you at 350 Seattle for their practicum site, but it's been so insightful to learn about and just hear from you how intersectional climate justice work is. Like you can do climate justice, like, because it impacts housing and it impacts health and it has a global perspective. And then it's also coalition work. Like it's never just one organization or one person. These big wins, like with Prop 1A, with the Climate Commitment Act, are coalition based and take a community, take of individuals just from neighborhoods, from organizations and leaders like you. So thank you so much for sharing all about that.